Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Monday. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 64 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, November 30th, 2022, we are studying Bill C-288, an act to amend the Telecommunications Act, Transparent and Accurate Broadband Services Information. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022. From the Department of Industry, we have with us to answer our questions, we have Andre Arbour. Thank you for being with us. He is Director General, Telecommunications and Internet Policy Branch. And without further ado, we'll move to our clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-288. Following that, we'll move on to C-294. So with Clause 1, there is an amendment, CPC 1, that you have. Who's proposing CPC 1?
Avant toute chose, laissez-moi.
Before that, I just want to clarify that we are moving the preamble. We are moving to the first clause, and we have the CPC Amendment 1.
C1, Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll introduce it. It's been circulated, I believe. So the purpose of this resolution, or this amendment to the bill, is just to create, as we heard from, I think, 4 witnesses during the testimony, a monitoring mechanism or requirement within the bill. I don't know if the bill's author has anything else to add, or?
Yes, during the process when the CRTC actually has hearings, that they talk how they're going to enforce this legislation. So it'll be enacted, just to ensure that there is a conversation about it during the hearings.
Okay. Est-ce que consentement?
Do we have consent to adopt CPC 1? Mr. Perkins.
Je pense que I believe there is unanimous consent, Monsieur Lemire.
Microphone, please.
Nos experts, excusez-moi, j'ai pas.
Apologies. Can we ask questions before we vote? I just wanted to know what the impact will be of such an amendment on the bill. Microphone, please.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. There shouldn't be any significant impact. There are measures in the consultations to find a balance for the industry. And secondly, there are requirements that are already in place in order to renew telecommunications policies, and that was done in February. So I do not foresee any significant impact. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Arbour.
Thank you, Mr. Arbour and Mr. Lemire. Do we still have unanimous consent to adopt the amendment? Perfect. Is Clause 1 approved as amended? Perfect. The preamble, is it adopted? Yes. The title? The bill as amended? Yes. So we have unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone. I'm not done. One moment. Can I make a report to the House? Yes. We'll be sharing a printed version of this at the House. Perfect. So that concludes the adoption of Bill C-288. We will make a report to the committee. Congratulations, Mr. Mazier. And Mr. Massey, you have the floor.
Actually, with the member here is to congratulate him and your work as well, too, in the committee. Been here for a while, and getting private members' businesses through is not always the easiest thing. So not only is this like a good effort in terms of bipartisanship, it's a good issue, and want to congratulate the member for working so cooperatively with committee, and thank you for leading us through this, getting a bill in the House, and hopefully the government will adopt and put this in order once it's passed the Senate.
Yes, congratulations, Mr. Mazier, and thanks to all for your collaboration. Good work. So I will briefly suspend so that we can get to 294 at this point. So, suspend.
We're going to move on to Bill C-294. And we have with us again Mr. Patrick Blanard, Director, Copyright and Trademark Policy Directorate, and Pierre-Luc Racine, Policy Advisor, Copyright and Trademark Policy Directorate. They are very used to being with us, and we would like to thank you again for being here as we do the clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-294. Before we start, just one moment. Let's start with Clause 1. There's one amendment on the table, Amendment G1. Mr. Fillmore and then Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just try to set the stage for this amendment so that we're all starting on the same page, and then we'll, after Mr. Perkins has a word, perhaps we can invite Mr. Blanard and Mr. Racine to elaborate if there are further questions. But the gist of this is I've been spending quite a bit of time with Mr. Perkins and and with Jeremy, Mr. Patzer. And I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think we've gotten very close to agreement. I don't think we're 100% there yet. I hope we get there after the next hour or so. The government has one amendment, G1, that we think is important to make sure that the intention, the Mr. Patzer's intention, is achieved. As written right now, we think there's a weakness. It's one amendment in 5 parts, and the parts 2 to 5 are dependent on part 1 passing the committee. So my impression, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I think there's agreement with the opposition parties on at least on the Conservative Party on the parts 2 to 5. If I'm understanding our conversations correctly, it's really the first part that we need to explore and get some more comfort for Mr. Patzer and Perkins. So and that's what I'd like to invite when you're ready, Chair, Mr. Blanard, to elaborate upon why it's important to achieve Mr. Patzer's intention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. So I'm sure we'll have the opportunity. I'll just turn to Mr. Perkins, who asked the floor.
Thanks, Mr. Fillmore. That was a good summary of where we're at. I think there's a few questions that some of the members have, but you're right that maybe to officials, our main concern is around 1B. We have some questions about some of the others, but the main one is around 1B, and the feeling that 2 things are sort of lost, perhaps, if I've got it right, in the amendment. One is the bill itself was very specific in choosing the term manufacturers for a reason. That my understanding is that manufacturers has a very specific meaning and definition of a group or an activity under law, and loss of that to a more general term in B1 is a question. And I guess the second part is the term lawfully obtained can cause a bit of a challenge in some of the circumstances where somebody is assembling something. So it's a question of lawfully obtained means who owns the license, I assume, right? Basically the license. So the original manufacturer of a small piece, and say the end buyer at retail ultimately owns some element of a license, but there can be an assembly manufacturer in the middle where they don't actually own the license in that process and need to be able to make the pieces talk together, if I've captured it right. So I wonder if you could answer those 2 questions first on 1B.
Oui, Monsieur Blanard.
Mr. Blanard?
Chair.
Yes, Jeremy,
So
that
if
was
I
what he needed.
specifically on manufacturers, specifically on manufacturers, we understand the desire to be more specific. I think the concern that we have is that comes at the risk of actually locking other people out. By specifying specifically who can do something, it creates a situation where that means that anybody who isn't a manufacturer may not be permitted to take these same actions. And I think the example I've been noodling in my head really comes down to, so if there's a farmer who already owns one tractor or one combine, I think is the right term, and then decides to change to a different platform, and they've already invested in a whole bunch of headers. And then so they want to simply make that interoperable, but they are not manufacturers. And if they have a fellow farmer who's already done this, they would not be permitted to rely on that colleague to assist them and actually do this for them. They'd have to go through a manufacturer, and honestly, I don't fully appreciate what that would mean for in this situation. Oh, and sorry, yes, the lawfully obtained. So with respect to lawfully obtained, basically, right now, the way the Copyright Act is drafted, it talks about the owner or the licensee, essentially. But when we looked at this bill, and we looked at CUSMA, and then we looked also at the way U.S. law is being drafted, it's using this concept of lawfully obtained, which we feel is broader, because we believe that if someone once someone is the owner, if they allow access to a third party, that software is still lawfully obtained, even though that third party is not the owner or the licensee. So that's where we feel that this actually goes and expands the scope of the bill as drafted, and we think this better fits the purpose and the intention that Mr. Patzer is seeking to achieve.
Yes, Mr. Patzer.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that just like lawfully obtained, it shortens up, like you say, broadens the definition. I mean, there's still the practical barrier around how that's all obtained, right? Like, and I'm just gonna get right into the specifics of it, right? Like the way that John Deere has been with the X9 combine, for example, right? It's set up in a way that you have part of the controller basically on a header and part of it now in the combine itself. Normally, the controller is all in the combine, and then you have a cable running out through the feeder house out to the front end where the header would attach, and then the header manufacturer has their interface with a cabling that goes out, make the connection, and away it goes. The interface does the talking with the controller, and it's done. But the way that John Deere is now manufacturing products is that, well, you have part of it here and now you have part of it there. So it's now a technical or a physical lock as well that is now in between there, but it's through the Copyright Act that they're still able to hide and be able to get to lock John Deere off the platform, because they still can, Honeybee, for example, still, I mean, they're not going to buy 70 different models from all the different manufacturers across the world. Like they testified about how they sell to 27 countries around the world. Some of those machines never make it to North America, right? So they're not actually going to be able to have the machine come to their shop to be able to reverse engineer and do the thing, right? So a lot of it is dependent on companies, just having a standardized electrical cabling system. But when now you have a company who's gone beyond that and now reinvented the wheel per se, and nobody else is allowed to have access to the reinvented wheel, is what's happening both physically and digitally. And that's the barrier that we're trying to prevent from becoming more common practice, because as the rest of the OEMs see that John Deere can get away with it, the rest of them are going to start doing the same thing. Monkey see, monkey do. So again, whether it's Honeybee or when you get it to the tow behind implements for planting, for seeding, I mean, there's a lot more short lines in the industry. The impacts are going to be realized by them in not too distant of a future as well. And then when you get to the other industries like mining and forestry, they're going to see the impacts as well, as companies go to lock out and both physically and digitally lock out these other companies. So the reason why we had the very specific exemption for manufacturers, so we think under A, we would be able to get somebody who is maybe not necessarily a manufacturer, but is still trying to make a product, that they would fall under A, whereas B, being very specific, like a manufacturer is in the dictionary references a corporate entity that makes a product, right? So it explicitly is very specific to who they're talking about, but it also. It also recognizes that what we're trying to accomplish with again, some of the new wording that's been added to the other portions of the Act, that it's the aftermarket product that we're talking about here, we're being specific to, right? So like, I definitely appreciate the language that has been recommended through G1 here. I just don't know that it's actually going to provide the certainty and clarity that industry is looking for, especially because a lot of this it'll be settled in court is the way that a lot of this will work. And at the end of the day, some of these big OEMs have a lot of power behind them, and nobody can withstand that legal challenge, right? So we want to make sure that we have absolute certainty and clarity within the act, so that way it's abundantly clear to the people who are trying to make these short line products. And again, there's a good study done by Western Economic Diversification that speaks to the impacts it has across the country. It's about making sure that those people have their, the jobs, but also the innovation that goes along with it, and the benefit to small town and rural Canada all across this country. So I worry that by removing some of the specifics on the manufacturer's exemption that we put in there, that we're removing that clarity and certainty that we were trying to achieve and obtain by putting forward the bill. I agree with the language in A and A and B, the way they're written, they make sense. But again, the fact that we're kind of steering away from the actual intent of B as it was written in the draft of C-294 originally, I think it kind of waters it down, makes it a little bit ambiguous, which opens the door for litigation to be levied against people who are trying to innovate.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. Yes, just 1 minute. I'll go to Mr. Erskine Smith.
Yeah, I was hoping, thanks, Jeremy, for that. And it would be helpful if we could get an answer from the department as to the example that Jeremy laid out there. How would the G1 amendment capture the example that Jeremy's proposed there, which is a real one? We heard testimony on it. And so Jeremy's expressed a concern there about the language. And can we credibly say back, can the department credibly say back, that example is captured, and walk us through? It's a bit technical, but can you walk us through how that example would be captured in the G1 amendment?
Monsieur Blanard.
So I think it's a little tricky to speak to the example specifically because I guess I don't fully appreciate how the manufacturer would get access to the equipment or the software that they need. If it were to be via an infringing method and they had an infringing copy, then the exception no longer applies because there's a non-application. So at the end of the day, they need to get it from someone who has it and has it legally. And that's where we believe that the lawfully acquired does that, because at that point it's not restricted to simply whether or not they are the owner or the licensee, which I feel is quite is like quite a direct relationship. We believe that the lawfully acquired basically expands that. And so if somebody wishes to work with Honeybee or any other manufacturer and make the equipment that they have purchased interoperable with the equipment that Honeybee produces, then they would be able to provide access to their combine to Honeybee, who would then be able to do the work. But there's nothing here, whether it's in your bill or in the law as drafted or in the amendment that is being proposed, that would allow a manufacturer to make an infringing copy in order to then work on it and circumvent it.
I'll go to Mr. Patzer, but I had Mr. Perkins. I don't know if you...
Yeah, so I guess maybe mine's sort of a follow-up to Mr. Patzer's statement, which is, if I'm doing my layman's interpretation of what he said, A is intended to be the broader application, and B is meant for a specific purpose. So if B goes into, we end up with just two broad statements that sort of are doing the same thing, A and B, as opposed to this specific example Mr. Patzer wanted in the bill in B, with A being the one that gives the power that you were speaking to.
I'll go to maybe Mr. Patzer and then Mr. Blanard.
Well, I just wanted a response. if I
Or
could.
Mr. Blanard, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think because, so in C-294 as drafted presently, so A already captures the majority of it, but doesn't go as far as what the government amendment would do by expanding it to beyond only those who own and license. B is difficult to interpret whether or not it would apply to a broader universe or whether it continues to be restricted by that same requirement of ownership and licensing. I think from what I've heard, the intention is to expand it, but at that point it becomes somewhat expanded without bound. And it's still, I think it's still bound by subsection 6, which basically says you can't do anything that's infringing. But it still has fewer bounds, which I understand is what seems to be sought. And this is where we think that this concept of lawfully acquired also, by being somewhat undefined, and it allows for more of that flexibility and more of that certainty that as long as it is not infringing or illegally acquired, that at the end of the day, they can work on it and it can be used not only in tractors, but in any number of industries, and not only by manufacturers, but others who are seeking to create interoperable devices, including small inventors who might be working outside of their garages or inside their garage, and who would, not qualify under a definition of a manufacturer.
So those innovators wouldn't be captured by in 294 as written?
Not as written, because at the end of the day, if they don't purchase or license the piece that they are seeking to make interoperable, then I think there's a gap there.
Yes, I'll go to Mr. Erskine Smith and then Mr. Fillmore.
I just had a question for Jeremy in respect of the G1 amendment. And on my reading, so someone is able to, on B, so they can, they buy a piece of equipment that has a piece of software embedded into it, and they're going to want to do work, take that and say, okay, I'm going to manufacture my own equipment that is interoperable with this. They've lawfully obtained that. So B does enable them to then make that interoperable with it says with any other computer program, device, or component. So they're, I'm manufacturing a device. If so long as I've lawfully obtained the original equipment with the software embedded in it, I mean, maybe it's not a question for Jeremy, but like that's the example you're using, right? And yeah, so I don't know if you've got a clarification on that, and then maybe we hear from the department as to, doesn't that then answer, like if I went about manufacturing a piece of equipment where I lawfully obtain what I want to ensure my equipment is interoperable with, am I not meeting the objection here or meeting the challenge?
So specific to a combine, like a harvesting machine, you have anywhere from 10 to 15 brands globally, if not more. Each brand, some have 10 different models, some have 5 different models. These machines are running about $1 million a piece now. So for a company like Honeybee to go out and purchase every single machine and every single model of that machine within the model year, but then also being at mercy of a software update to void the license that they have to use the software in the machine, because they don't own the software in the machine. They buy the machine, but they don't own the software, right? When you go to fire up your machine, you have to accept the terms and conditions which state clearly that you do not even own the software in the machine. So you don't actually own it, but you get a presumed license as the operator of the machine and the software. So the problem for manufacturers is that, yeah, they're not going to go out and buy all these machines. A lot of them, yeah, Honeybee sells to 27 different countries around the world, which means many of these machines are never even made available in North America, but they still export their product overseas. For example, they have a rice belt header. That's widely used over in other parts of the world, but there might be a few people that use it in North America, but generally speaking, it's a specialty machine or a specialty header for a machine that's used over in other parts of the world.
So, Jeremy, can we get the department to respond to what you just said? Because, that's we want to include, I speak for myself. The challenge you've laid out is a real one and makes perfect sense. So how does the department respond if the amendment is not going to address that challenge and allow for that kind of innovation? What are we left with exactly?
So I guess my first response to that is it's not so much a copyright issue and it's not so much a TPM issue. It's a contract issue at that point. Because if there are contractual obligations between the manufacturer and the end user, and they have the authority to modify the software that's embedded at will, I don't know how copyright addresses that. And
I'll maybe just jump in quickly there, because they're not looking to modify software at any point. All they're looking for from the OEMs is the information to make their product work, right? So in the case of in the case of Honeybee, they don't necessarily need the software, but they just need access to the information to make their product work. And if they can't get that, they can't buy a copy of the software to be able to just find that information. John Deere now has that proprietary physical connector that is illegal for them to reverse engineer. John Deere is not selling an adapter to all the other competitors to be able to make their product connect as well. So some of that's competition, right? So some of that's taken care of by Brian's bill that he hopefully down the road can bring forward. But it's a multifaceted issue, but a lot of it comes down to certainty within the Copyright Act, because in order for them to circumvent a TPM to get the information that they need the clarity within the Act to be able to do so. In the United States, the exemption has existed for between 10 and 11 years to be able to circumvent a TPM to access information to make a product interoperable. We don't have that in Canada. So that's what we try to, we kind of do, but not to the extent that the Americans do. So that's what we're trying to accomplish with this bill, is to match what the Americans have by what the end result is. It's not the same mechanism. Their system's different, obviously, as to how they achieve it, but we're trying to get the same level of exemption that the Americans have, so that we're on a level playing field with them, but also to be able to encourage industry to continue, obviously, to innovate, right? So, yeah.
so I think looking at the American law, they use the same language. They use lawfully acquired. So I think if the objective is to reach the same level as what's permitted in the United States, I think that is how we achieve that. And so I think ultimately that is what this does. And this goes beyond, because what the U.S. has done with their exceptions to TPM regimes is created very narrow verticals and said, okay, you can have exceptions for farming equipment. You can have exceptions for medical devices. You can have exceptions for cell phones. We're taking a broader approach, one that says if you're seeking to achieve interoperability, and it's not even that we're taking that approach. We have had it since 2012 when we first introduced this. So we have had this exception for create interoperability between computer programs. And what your bill is seeking to do is to expand that to ensure that it's not just computer program to computer program, but computer program to potentially a dumb device. Because the example you gave, which was, part of the program is in the combine, part of the program is in the header, that's already captured today in the Copyright Act. That is interoperability between two computer programs. So at the end of the day, this is expanding it, but really to capture those situations where the interoperability is not between two computer programs, but rather one computer program and one device that may not have embedded software, but may have some kind of embedded serial number or something like that that is simply being verified or validated against, versus it's actually creating that handshake between the two pieces so that they can speak to each other.
Yeah, and I guess it's that barrier that's been blocking the handshake right now that we're trying to get around, right? So that is the topic du jour, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, there seems to be. I'm just trying to make sure we have as much certainty and clarity for these guys, because it's big money, but it's entire communities being wiped off the map as well too if these industries all disappear from their towns, right? So yeah, okay.
Yeah, if there's no more questions, I had Mr. Fillmore, but I think you're okay. At the suggestion of Mr. Perkins, we could maybe take a few minutes break just to see where all parties are at on G1 and resume shortly. So I'll suspend briefly. Chers collègues,
Colleagues, welcome back. I think that we may have found a solution. If I understood correctly, there is unanimous consent. Mr. Perkins?
The agreement of all the parties, the government and the opposition parties and officials. I think we've got an agreement right now and the sponsor of the bill, to put G1 into place, with the thought, obviously, down the road, there'll be some more work and opportunity perhaps to refine it a little more when it goes to the Senate. Everyone else in agreement with that?
Sure am. Yes, Brian.
Absolutely agree, and thank you to the sponsor of the bill. 2 bills coming through pre-Bs today, pretty historic. So again, thank you to the sponsor.
So I gather that G1 is adopted unanimously. Donc on va quand même y aller avec les formalités.
We're still going to go with the formalities that we have to go through. Clause 1. Shall Clause 1 carry as amended? Yes. Shall the title carry? Yes. Shall the bill as amended carry? Yes. Shall the chair report the bill as amended to the House? Yes. Shall the committee order a reprint of the bill as amended for the use of the House at the report stage? Yes. Thank you all. And I agree with Mr. Massey. Congratulations, Mr. Patzer, for your work. And thank you for being with us today. Thank you to Mr. Blenard and Mr. Racine, who have been with us a few times. And with that said, that's all that we had on our agenda for today. If there are no further comments, the meeting is adjourned.